All right, today was day 2 of the Julian Assange appeals hearing in the UK, and the prosecution rested its case this afternoon. Yesterday, we heard from the defense making compelling arguments, of course, that Julian Assange should not be extradited to the United States, not the least of which is his health problems. He's not seen his family. And yes, he is not doing very well in Belmarsh prison. Also, this is politically motivated. And you cannot extradite someone when it's politically motivated. That literally is part of the statute. So all of those compelling arguments yesterday, were they undone today by the prosecution laying out their case in front of the judge? Independent journalist Taylor Hudak is in the courthouse over the past few days, and she's been doing an amazing job covering what the defense and now the prosecution have been saying. And she filed this report for Redacted just a short time ago outside the courthouse.
Hi everyone, I'm journalist Taylor Hudak and I'm outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London. We just wrapped up day 2 of the appeal hearing in the extradition proceedings of Wikileaks founder Julian Assange. Now, similar to yesterday when I arrived at the courthouse, despite the rain, there were hundreds of protesters gathered outside to demonstrate their support, and you can still see there are people behind me outside the courthouse showing their support for free speech and Julian Assange. Now, inside the courtroom today, the Crown Prosecution Service, representing the U.S. government, presented their rebuttal to the defense arguments that were presented yesterday. Claire Dobbin, for the prosecution, spent quite a bit of time addressing the association between Julian Assange and whistleblower Chelsea Manning. It was Manning who leaked documents on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to Julian Assange, which he then published through Wikileaks. Now, on this point, Dobbin, for the prosecution, made several attempts to separate Assange's activities from that of a journalist, stating that Assange encouraged and solicited Manning to provide more information and that he publicly asked others to provide material to Wikileaks. Now, of course, this is news-gathering techniques that journalists engage in all the time. You encourage your sources to provide more information, and to seek to criminalize this behavior will set a dangerous global precedent. One must also ask, is it right for judges, politicians, and state officials to determine who is and who is not a journalist? Is it up to public officials to decide what is responsible journalism? Now, moving on to a related point, the prosecution repeatedly stated that WikiLeaks published the names of informants in their releases and thus potentially put lives at risk. This was strongly countered by the defense, in which they argued that WikiLeaks actually took the time to redact the names. It was one of the media partners who published in his book the password to a media file, which included those documents unredacted. Right after Assange had learned of this at the time, he went to great lengths to reduce harm. In fact, he had a phone call, which has been published on Project Veritas, which was also verified by WikiLeaks editor-in-chief Kristen Hrafnsson as authentic, in which Assange warns the State Department about this incident of the circulating password. Also, other organizations were the first to publish the documents unredacted. Even the judge today made a point to the prosecution, stating that by the time WikiLeaks had published this information, redacted by the way, the publications were already available on several websites. So this does raise the question, why is WikiLeaks being prosecuted? This argument points to a very important point here, that this is in fact a selective prosecution. The defense made another very strong point, stating that the prosecution is relying on the U.S.-UK extradition treaty to prosecute Assange, but they ignored the safeguards and protections within the treaty, namely Article 4, which prevents extradition for political offenses. But the prosecution instead cites the UK Extradition Act, which is domestic law and does not include a provision which prevents extradition for political offenses. Now, this hearing has, of course, concluded. It is wrapped up. This was the final day, and it is up to these 2 judges to examine the evidence presented and then issue a decision. At the end of the hearing this afternoon, the judges stated that they will stay the decision, and they ordered for both parties, the defense and prosecution, to submit the relevant documents in the coming weeks. Now, there's just a few more points that I want to share with the viewers that are important to note. If Assange is extradited to the United States, he would be tried in the Eastern District Court of Virginia, where no national security defendant has ever won a case. It is highly likely that the jury would be comprised of members of the intelligence community, their family members and friends. This has also been discussed by former CIA whistleblower John Kiriakou. Therefore, the jury would be highly prejudiced against Assange. He would also be subjected to SAMs, or special administrative measures, which is beyond just solitary confinement. Given that he is charged with espionage, he would not be able to provide a public interest defense. So those are just a few points. I'm barely scratching the surface here on what he could face in a U.S. prison. That's all I have for today. That concludes the hearing as well. I will continue to cover this case. As soon as we have a decision, I will report on it for Activism Munich. And you could also follow my updates, of course, on Telegram at Taylor Hudak. My channel is Taylor Hudak Media. I'm also on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak. And I also do report for the Last American Vagabond. So again, a great pleasure to be back here to provide you all with the updates. Now is a very important point in this case. As I said yesterday, talk to your friends, family members, neighbors, raise awareness. Don't stop fighting for your rights and for your right to know and have access to truthful information. Thank you guys for having me again, and have a great rest of your show.
Yes. Like, how is that a fair jury that you're going to get in the United States?
Right.
I mean, it's unbelievable to think that that's...
And that the same freedoms and rules that we have don't apply to him. The
right.
human interest rules or anything like that, that we can just pluck... I mean, that's terrifying that the United States can just pluck people from other places and be like, get in here, we're going to torture you for doing what we don't like.
I mean, I do want to call out something she pointed out, which I think is really telling, that the judge pushed back and pointed out that this information... redacted was already sent out, was already made, of course, was public. This was already available. And then when WikiLeaks published it, redacted, it had already been out there.
Right.
So this was, why hasn't anyone else been prosecuted for this? Why you're just going after Julian Assange for this? Interesting. So we're now going to await this judge's response. Again, it could come
whenever.
It could come whenever. I mean, and we won't know. I mean, and she makes the point, of course, that in the past they have waited weeks, months to render a decision here. So we could be sitting waiting for this. Imagine.
The temperature is hot on this one, though. And like she says, you know, tell your representatives, tell your friends, tell everyone who's willing to get worked up over this, and maybe it helps. You know, I'm just holding on to this collective energy.
I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. You know, YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it. And we will see you next time, everyone.